Natasha.
Debbie.
Show.
The show.
Welcome to it. Just two patriotic girls.
Learning about the world.
So please, don't take us the wrong way.
Hi, welcome to the Natasha and Debbie show. We've been receiving a lot of comments about where is that 100,000 subscriber plaque.
That's true.
Well, we had pre-recorded a few videos, so here it is, and here it will stay.
It's there.
And thank you again.
Yeah, we had moved it to where the rugby ball is, which is behind Debbie's head. But then we realized in that live video that we did, we weren't sitting where we normally sit. So it's back to where we thought it would be. So again, thank you guys so much for your support for our show. We appreciate you so much. You really have no idea how much.
Exactly.
And having said that, if you do like the show, please hit the like button.
And also consider subscribing. It's absolutely free.
So guys, exactly 1 year ago today, we did the very first video and our very first look ever into the Falklands conflict. I still say war because lives were lost. To me, that's a war. And we checked out a video that gave an overview. And it was really quite different than what we had expected, wasn't it?
Definitely. I mean, we were never really taught much about it in school, so it's great to
We were so
hear
young.
about it.
I mean, I was too young when it was happening.
You were very young, and
Yeah.
I was a teenager not paying attention to current affairs of the world.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't even in school when it happened. I was like a year old.
Yeah.
I'm like, hold on.
You were
So
a
I guess
baby.
I would have learned a little bit. But anyway, and then we also, right after that, not too long after that, we did a video on Operation Black Buck, which was pretty cool. Still an overview. Now, there's a lot of different facets to the Falklands conflict. We know that. And we haven't done anything else since then. And thought, here a year later, after we did the first one, this would be a good time to look more into this this conflict. And before I go on to what that is, our sincerest respects to those of the fallen on both sides, of course.
Absolutely.
And anyone watching this that is active duty military or veterans of our allied forces, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Always. So today's episode is what?
We're going to take a look at Falklands conflict in the air, how British Harriers beat the odds.
Okay, the Harrier. We've seen that a couple times, but I don't know much about it. And this sounded really interesting. So I know that originally Argentina seemed to have like a big advantage.
They did.
And so how did they beat the odds? And that's what we're here to find out. So let's take a look at this. And I think this is going to be very interesting. Hopefully it's not too much of an overview. I think it might be a little bit better than that. So without any further ado, here we go.
When the Falklands conflict began, it seemed like Argentina had a massive advantage in the skies. They had over 100 aircraft of varying types. Some could operate from the Argentinian mainland, and others could operate from airstrips on the Falklands themselves. Meanwhile, the British task force was initially restricted to the just 20 Sea Harriers, which could fit on its 2 aircraft carriers.
Yeah,
it was up to them to
travel.
protect the task force at sea, as well as the troops on the ground. To many, that seemed like an impossible task.
I agree.
Yeah, with
In this third episode of our Falkland series, we're going to examine the conflict in the air. Just how big was the Argentinian advantage? How did each side change their strategy? And how did British pilots beat the odds and take control of the skies?
On paper, Argentina had air supremacy over the Falkland Islands. Britain would need a superb, high-performance, fixed-wing fighter aircraft if there was to be any attempt to counter the Argentine advantage. It was the aircraft behind me, the Harrier, and its naval cousin, the Sea Harrier, upon which British hopes were placed, but we'll take a closer look at that later on.
Okay.
As the British task force made its way down to the South Atlantic, the Argentinians began setting up defences on the islands, with men and supplies constantly flown in. The main airport was at Stanley, the Falklands capital, with other smaller airfields at Goose Green and Pebble Island. Stanley was the only hard, all-weather runway on the Falklands, but it was still not long enough for Argentina's fast jets, which remained on the mainland.
Okay.
The Argentinian Air Force had Dassault Mirage 3s, IAI Daggers, Douglas A4 Skyhawks, and even English Electric Canberras purchased from Britain in the 1970s.
Oh.
The supersonic Mirages and Daggers were a serious threat, but flying from the Argentinian mainland put them at the limits of their fuel range.
Okay.
The Argentinian Navy had an aircraft carrier, the Veinticinco de Mayo, which was also equipped with Skyhawks, while from the mainland they flew the Dassault Breguet Super Étendard, which could be equipped with the feared Exocet anti-ship missile, 5 of which were known to be in Argentina's armoury.
The Argentinians also had a number of smaller light attack aircraft based on airfields on the Falklands, as well as IA-58 Picaras, like the one behind me. It was a 2-seat, low-wing, twin turboprop, ground attack and counter-insurgency aircraft. It had 2 cannons, 4 machine guns, and bombs and rockets could be attached to the 3 external hardpoints.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did British Harriers beat the odds at this point? I'm sitting there going, I know you did, but did you?
Yeah, right.
Because I know you did, but hearing that's a lot. It's a lot to go up against. And that thing's a beast.
Yeah, it sure is. Carrying all that ammo.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot, guys.
It was low performance in comparison to the Mirage especially, but it was manoeuvrable and could take off from short, rough airfields, perfect for the Falklands. This aircraft joined Grupo Area 3 de Ataque, or Attack Group 3, at Port Stanley on the 29th of May 1982, piloted by First Lieutenant Ayerdi. It carried out various armed escort missions for Chinook helicopters, and on the 10th of June was involved in an attack on Mount Kent on East Falkland.
Wow.
In the face of all of these Argentinian aircraft, it was crucial that Britain established air superiority before attempting to land troops on the Falklands.
Smart.
The first step was eliminating the island's most important airfield at Stanley. Denying its use would not only demonstrate Britain's will to fight for the Falklands, but also force a change of strategy for the Argentinians. But pulling off that raid would be a very difficult job. A bomber would have to fly over 3,800 miles from Ascension Island to Stanley, with multiple air-to-air refueling manoeuvres on the way, damage the runway enough to deny its use, and then fly all the way back to Ascension.
Yeah, and that's the crazy part.
I know, that still blows me away how far that they had to go to just to get there.
Yeah.
To defend. And
the refueling process is just maddening. It's maddening.
It's crazy.
It is.
This was the aircraft they chose for the job, the Avro Vulcan B-2, a jet-powered, high-altitude, strategic bomber designed to carry Britain's nuclear weapons during the Cold War. The Vulcan had 2 defining characteristics which were suddenly in demand: its long-range capability, which could be extended through refueling, and its ability to carry 21,000-pound bombs. Wow. This particular Vulcan was delivered to IWM Duxford just 1 month before the Falklands conflict began by a pilot called Martin Withers. The Ministry of Defence actually asked if they could have the Vulcan back, but the museum managed to persuade them otherwise. One thing they probably did take was the fuel probe, and for very good reason. At the time, the Vulcan raid on Port Stanley would become the longest range bombing mission in the history of aerial warfare, codenamed the Black Buck Raid.
Just before midnight on the 30th of April.
I said this the first time we saw this, and I don't think it was the right word. I said it looked like I can't remember what did I say. I think I said it looked like some badass butterfly or something.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's the wrong thing to compare that to. It's like a sky leopard. I don't know. It's cool. It just looks freaking cool.
It does look cool.
Thing's awesome. Sorry.
Codenamed the Black Buck Raid.
Just before midnight on the 30th of April 1982, 2 Vulcan bombers and 11 Victor tankers took off from Wide Awake Airfield on Ascension Island. Almost immediately, the lead Vulcan suffered a technical difficulty, which meant the reserve Vulcan, XM607, flown by Martin Withers, had to take over instead. Over the next 8 hours, the Victor tankers completed a complex sequence of fuel transfers to the Vulcan and to each other. This process was not without its issues, but on the morning of May 1st, they reached the target. Withers and his crew dropped the payload of 21,000-pound bombs from 10,000 feet. One bomb cratered the runway, and the others caused further damage to the airfield. A few hours later, Sea Harriers from HMS Hermes followed up with more attacks on the airstrips at Stanley and Goose Green. Later still, XM607 arrived back at Ascension Island after 16 hours in the air.
The
Dang!
Black Book raid on the 1st of May would be the first of 7 Black Book raids over the course of May and June 1982.
Yeah.
The short-term and long-term success of these raids is still debated. There's contention as to whether the cost of resources, in terms of the number of aircraft and the amount of fuel used, for instance, alongside the risk involved for people, whether that could ever be justified with assessing the arguably limited impact of the missions. But while its physical impact is debated, its tactical impact is clear. The raid on the 1st of May demonstrated that the Royal Air Force had the range to bomb airfields in the Falklands and therefore had the potential to reach mainland Argentina.
That was a shock and a surprise because
Yeah.
just thinking about the distance alone, right? I mean,
Mhm.
my Lord, that's impressive. That just is impressive. And it's cool. I'm sorry. It's so cool
It's
watching the
absolutely cool.
refueling thing. It's just so cool.
It's just the pilots to be able to fly for 16 hours straight like that. That's
Oh my Lord, I
incredible.
couldn't even imagine. It's nuts.
In response to that threat, Argentina decided to hold more of its fast jets back to protect the mainland. The following day, things got worse.
Yeah, we
when the
remember this part.
Argentinian cruiser General Belgrano was sunk by the submarine HMS Conqueror. This forced the Argentinian Navy, including the 25 de Mayo, to largely withdraw.
Sorry, I remember in the very first one we watched on this,
Mhm.
my favorite ship name, it was the HMS Invincible,
Yep.
wasn't it?
I think
That's
that
just
was
the
it.
coolest name, Invincible.
It shows
It's just,
strength.
it's cool.
This forced the Argentinian Navy, including the 25 de Mayo, to largely withdraw to port. They would play no further role in the conflict. In the first air-to-air battles over the Falklands, the British refused to climb to the Mirage's optimal altitude and
Okay.
vice versa. When they eventually engaged, the Argentinians lost 2 Mirages and a Canberra, all shot down by British Sea Harriers. In addition to their fuel problems,
I
Canberra
love those
all
kinds of
shot down
deaths.
by British Sea Harriers.
Yeah,
Awesome.
they can just
In
go
addition
down.
to their fuel problems, Argentinian pilots also lacked experience. They were more
Oh,
prepared
really?
for a war with Chile than fighting over the South Atlantic. Meanwhile,
Okay.
on the ground, Argentinian air crews struggled to service their aircraft, with spare parts hard to come by.
That first day was absolutely crucial in the extent that it almost set the pattern for all subsequent operations. It gave us enormous confidence. Looked at from the other way round, I think the demoralizing effect on the Argentine Air Force must have been colossal. Now that pattern, happily, I'm glad to say, continued. They decided they would retain a number of aircraft in defense of their airfields ashore. Had they actually committed more aircraft to deal with the combat air patrol over the landing area, perhaps it would have been different.
From this point onwards,
Sorry, I think that was a good point that he brought up there. You know, the soldiers and the pilots having the confidence and having the experience, that really does play a huge role. It's also not only the strategic ground or air
Absolutely.
fighting, but it's also, you know, your pilots' experience, giving
Yeah.
them the morale to do what they're supposed to do.
I totally agree with you.
Combat air patrol over the landing area, perhaps it would have been different.
From this point onwards, Argentina essentially tried to avoid air-to-air combat with the Harriers, using Mirages as decoys to draw them off, while the
It didn't work,
Daggers
did it?
and Skyhawks
Or
attacked
did
the
it?
fleet. It seemed Argentina's air power wasn't all it was cracked up to be. That was until the 4th of May, when HMS Sheffield came under attack from a pair of Argentinian Super Etendards. It was hit by one of 2 Exocet missiles and later sank. For the British, that was a stark warning.
Yeah.
The loss of an aircraft carrier to an Exocet would end any chance of success for the British task force. As a consequence, the British carriers predominantly remained well out of their range to the east of the Falklands for the remainder of the conflict.
Kinda had a choice on that
However,
one.
by increasing the distance they had to fly, this reduced the amount of time the Harriers could spend over the islands,
Right.
leaving the ships and ground forces more exposed. On the 21st of May, the first British landings began on the Falklands. To minimise this still considerable air threat, the British chose to land at San Carlos on East Falkland. It was hoped that the hills around the bay would provide sheltered waters from air attack, but that didn't stop the Argentinians from trying.
British ships were attacked by Picaras, Skyhawks, Mirages and Daggers over the next few days, but it was the Skyhawks that would become the most feared silhouette as the British forces could see the aircraft's impressive manoeuvrability against the sky from the ships below. Few Argentine pilots had even been trained in low-level flying, and fewer still to undertake attacks on ships in open water. Having flown for hours from mainland Argentina, they only had the chance to engage in a few attacks before heading home again. But despite all of that, they still managed to achieve significant damage, all the while under fire themselves from the ships below and from Sea Harriers.
We persuaded the flight commanders that it would be a good idea to stay on the ship. Of course, we never realised that was the biggest mistake of our lives.
Yep.
Because everybody on shore was watching the ships getting hit. They used to break the masts, the aerials of the ship, the pilots, as they were flying so low.
We thought at first that the Argentinian Air Force were mad, but as time went on, we changed our views drastically. They were very professional in the way they conducted their business.
They came down San Carlos Water, the first one just blown straight out of the sky. 3 missiles hit it. Their pilots were possibly some of the bravest men of the whole campaign. I mean, if everything they dropped had gone off, we'd still be down there fighting now.
Fortunately for the British, many of the Argentine bombs failed to explode due to problems with the setting of their fuses. Essentially, the aircraft had flown at a height lower than the fuses had been set, so the bombs hit their target before they had the chance to explode.
I didn't know any of this. Like, this is not, I mean, this is, it's making me very nervous. Is it just me?
No, it is me too.
And I'm watching that flying around going, yeah, I'm hearing they're not that experienced too. Like, that seems very low. I mean, not as low as they're saying it's supposed to be, right? But still.
But could you imagine flying a ship into a plane into an area where there's so many ships around ready to shoot you down?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
The nerve that would take.
I got nothing on that one.
There hadn't been this issue with the bomb fuses, the losses at San Carlos Water would have been catastrophic. By the 25th of May 1982, 3 ships had sunk and 8 more were damaged. However, the Argentine decision to target the ships in the Falklands Sound meant that the ground forces were able to land unopposed. British troops were now just 13 miles from the Argentine garrison at Darwin and Goose Green, and just 50 miles from Port Stanley.
Despite their successes at San Carlos, the Argentinian air forces were sustaining losses at an alarming rate. They couldn't keep up these kind of attacks for long. However, with a limited number of British aircraft in the skies, there were inevitably gaps in the Harriers' combat air patrols. That's exactly what happened on the 8th of June during the Fitzroy air attacks. As British troops were moved forward for attacks on the mountains around Port Stanley, Royal Fleet auxiliary ships Sir Galahad and Sir Tristram were attacked. Both ships were badly damaged by Argentinian Skyhawks, killing 50 men and wounding a further 150. The Argentinian air attacks on the same day sank a British landing craft, killing 6, and severely damaged HMS Plymouth. It was in moments like this that British helicopters became crucial, ferrying casualties to field hospitals or aboard ships. Since the sinking of the SS Atlantic Conveyor and the heavy lifting helicopters it was carrying, the remaining helicopters and their crews were operating at the limit of their capacity.
I'm sure they were.
British forces were supported by a range of helicopters, including the single surviving Boeing Chinook and the Westland Gazelle, Sea King, Lynx, Wasp, Scout and Wessex.
Helicopters were the workhorses for the British forces during the Falklands conflict.
Yeah, and they never get the credit.
No,
they're not talked about ever.
No, because they're not the fighter planes.
Exactly.
They're definitely needed.
Yeah, well said. But they really are never really discussed in any conflict, any war. I mean, they do a lot. And without them, oh man, I don't even know.
This Wessex helicopter behind me last flew on the 8th of December 1980, so did not serve during the Falklands conflict. But the Wessex type of helicopter is probably best known for its exploits in the Falklands. At the beginning of the conflict, they helped sink the Argentine submarine Santa Fe.
One of those was, I remember from our first videos, people were saying one of those ships was originally one of ours. One of the Argentine ships, I believe. I just don't know which one it was.
I remember that, but yeah, I don't remember the name of the ship either.
It might have been the first one that got sunk, I think. I forgot what I was going to say. I paused this for a reason. Prince Andrew, did he not fly one of the helicopters in the Falklands? Pretty sure you guys told us that last year.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong on that. I think I'm right.
And recapture South Georgia from Argentine forces in April 1982. Towards the end of the conflict in June, a Wessex 5 fired 2 AS-12 missiles at the town hall in Port Stanley,
Oh, wow.
with the aim of killing senior Argentine commanders inside, but missed, hitting the police station instead.
Oh.
So the Wessex helicopter had a crucial role that bookended the conflict.
Yeah, it did.
A week on from the disaster at Fitzroy, British troops would enter Stanley as the Argentinians surrendered. So just how did the British prevail? How did they overcome the odds in the air? The answer, at least in part, is the Harrier.
One of the Harrier's key features was its VSTOL capability, which stands for Vertical and Short Takeoff and Landing.
Which is like the coolest thing ever.
This essentially means being able to take off from the ground vertically. So
Sorry, I get really excited when I see those. Any jet that can do that, I just think it's the coolest thing. The first time I ever saw that, I'm like, that's a helicopter. That's not a helicopter.
Exactly.
It's just so cool. Like, I mean, they're just neat. This is not excitement for war.
No.
This is excitement for a really cool, crafted piece of awesomeness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I only wanted to take that the wrong way. Listen to our intro.
This essentially means being able to take off from the ground vertically, so straight upwards, and to take off within a short amount of runway.
Yeah.
GR3s are fitted with a Rolls-Royce Pegasus 103 turbofan engine
Really?
and 4 nozzles to either side of the aircraft. To achieve VSTOL, the pilot would switch the direction of the aircraft's thrust by rotating its nozzles.
Cool.
The ability to take off and land vertically
That's awesome.
would prove invaluable when operating from aircraft carriers, especially.
I'm ignorant. What was the first jet, plane, whatever, to do that? I don't know. You don't know either, do you?
I surely do know.
Okay. Let us know if you don't mind, because I don't know. But I would be interested to find out.
Would prove
awesome.
invaluable when operating from aircraft carriers, especially when the flight decks were already packed with other aircraft.
Well said.
The Harrier's benefits were not just logistical, it was also an excellent combat aircraft. The Sea Harriers were primarily employed in air-to-air combat, protecting the task force and ground troops. While the Harriers were slower than the Argentinian Mirages and Daggers, they had an important trick up their sleeve.
That's awesome.
The AIM-9L Sidewinder air-to-air missile.
What?
While previous air-to-air missiles could only be fired from directly behind the enemy, the Sidewinder worked regardless of their position, giving British pilots a major advantage. Those pilots had been testing their dogfighting skills against the best NATO had to offer for many years, making them a formidable fighting force.
Yeah, I'd say
Together,
so.
their equipment and training allowed the British to dominate the air-to-air battle. Of the 10 Harriers lost during the conflict, none came due to enemy aircraft, while Argentina lost at least 20 in air combat alone.
Oh, wow.
I saw these 2 delta wing shapes low. I flew through them head on, thinking, right, we've got a fight here now, at last. Then as I got through the turn, there was in the sky in front of me Steve firing the first missile as it exploded. A big gout of flame obscured the whole aircraft. But at that stage, Steve had already switched attention to a second Mirage, which was some distance ahead, fired the second Sidewinder. And this was really driving my mind crazy at the time, because it's a wonderful thing to see. You know, this is happening, it's terrific. But while I was thinking like that, there was a third Dagger who was behind me, who was firing his cannons at me. And I thought, you know, watch a 6 o'clock Sharky. And I was still in the hard turn the whole time. I looked round and there was this Mirage passing underneath me. Beautiful colours in camouflage. All I had to do really was pull down hard, and he didn't stand a chance because I got in behind him and fired my missile.
Dang, man.
The initial 20 British Sea Harriers were joined by further Sea Harriers and Harrier GR3s, the latter operated by No. 1 Fighter Squadron RAF from the very unfamiliar surroundings of an aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
It was thought that the GR3s would be used as replacements for Sea Harrier losses, but those losses were so few that they ended up being tasked primarily with their classic ground attack role, striking Argentinian positions around Darwin and Goose Green and supporting British forces around Mount Kent and in the assault on Port Stanley.
Okay.
So that the GR3s could operate from aircraft carriers, modifications were required and fast. Alterations were made to the GR3 airframe and systems, including radar and navigation. It was even reported that holes were drilled in the airframe to allow seawater to run out.
What?
This particular Harrier GR3 operated from a temporary landing strip established at San Carlos. This allowed it to respond more rapidly to attack missions if required, and also freed up space on the aircraft carriers. This Harrier carried out attacks around Port Stanley and undertook a reconnaissance mission looking for ground-launched Exocet missiles. It attacked positions on Mount Harriet and narrowly escaped an Argentine surface-to-air missile over Mount Longdon, which exploded only 100 feet or 30 meters above the cockpit. After the conflict...
Wow. And they're showing pictures. I'm looking at that cockpit, and it's so tiny.
Yeah.
And then, I guess that's the propeller engine right behind you. I couldn't imagine what it would be like to be in that.
I don't want to know. I would sit in it, but I wouldn't fly in it. That thing's a beast.
It is. I mean, definitely, it was essential.
Oh, absolutely. This is actually riveting and also very tense and also very sad. But it's oh my gosh.
100 feet or 30 meters above the cockpit.
Wow.
After the conflict, it was transferred back to the UK, and it has been at IWM Duxford since 1992.
Oh, wow.
Wars aren't fought on paper. Argentina appeared to have an advantage in the skies over the Falklands, with superior numbers and closer supply lines. But in reality, the British advantage in training and technology made the fight far more even. Things could have gone much worse for the British had a carrier been lost or if landing forces had been hit at San Carlos. But instead, by the final weeks of the conflict, British Harriers and helicopters dominated the skies over the Falklands.
Wow. That was a lot. That was a lot. The story of this of the conflict, and again, this is something that happened. It's not just a story, but hearing it, it sounds. It did at the beginning. It's like we knew what happened. We knew the end result, right? But at the beginning, talking about all the different jets and things that the Argentines had, it's like. Yeah,
yeah, and how much closer they were, and like it's been said in there, on paper, it seems like that they had the lead, the advantage. But obviously, it wasn't that way in the end. And again, we want to say thank you to everyone serving. Thank you for your service.
Yes, thank you for your service, and anyone watching that was in this conflict. I can't imagine. I can't on both sides. I can't imagine what you went through. Because, oh man, that's rough. It was a lot of information in here that I had no idea on. I do like watching the Harriers go the vertical take off and land. I think that's just cool. But again, I'm sure you guys will know. And I could Google it, but I want to wait and ask you.
There's always so much that goes into a conflict, the strategizing and how to think about it, air, land, sea.
Well, and
working it all together at the same time, and using your technology and your upgraded weapons,
your skill set
the
too,
skill of your soldiers.
Yeah, and what you've been trained to do. And if you haven't had that training, doesn't matter how many fighter jets you have, how many this you have, how much this you have. If you don't have the training, doesn't matter.
Yes, everything has to work together.
Absolutely, and it's still hate war, hate conflicts, don't like it. But learning about this is something that we've been wanting to do, and we have started last year, and we want to keep going with it as much as we can and learn more about it. Thank you for watching, and I hate saying if you liked this episode, but you know what I mean. You know what we mean. Hit the like button if you're here. You like our content, I guess.
And also consider subscribing. It's absolutely free.
And thank you guys again for being here today and watching with us, and we'll see you back on the next episode. Until then, and as always, guys, please love, like, jazz.
Be as strong as Tyson.
Bye-bye.
Bye.